welcome to the Ridgecrest podcast. This is where we take time each week for a deeper look into the previous Sunday sermon. My name is Matt. I'm the executive and discipleship pastor here at Ridgecrest, and join with me is our senior pastor, Mike Estes. Great to have you.
It's good to have you back.
Yeah.
Did you have a good trip away?
Yeah, it was good. We went to the beach, which I'm not a super fan of.
I'm shocked.
But yeah, but the family had a good time at the beach and stuff. And
legit question: what is a fun vacation for you? Do you take vacations that are fun? I believe you do.
I like solitude.
Okay.
And so like for me, like one thing that I ended up doing a lot on this vacation, of course I got sunburned the first day.
Always at the beach.
Yeah.
It's miserable. Like
That's right.
It doesn't matter how much sunscreen you put on. It's because, and this is true of me as well. It's because I'm so pale already.
Yes. Yeah.
That as soon as I spend any time out in the sun,
That's
it's
right.
just bad.
That's right.
Okay. So sunburn day
I
one.
got sunburn day one. So that kind of gave me an excuse to not go to the beach any longer because it hurt, And so usually like what I would spend most of my time doing was like just watching, like I was binge watching Criminal Minds. I watched it years ago, and just was cranking through those. And so just it was. I did try to read a book.
That's good.
But that did not work well. So then I shifted to Criminal Minds because I went into it like I'm gonna read a novel or whatever you would characterize like a nonfiction book as, or no fiction book. But I made
novels one of those. Yeah.
I made a page in, and I was like, I can't do it.
Like I told you before, I just got to give you a good book. Maybe you picked the wrong book.
Maybe. So that's my deal. And of course, then we I also like to go out and do something like, of course, my vacation, especially if I'm going to the beach, is seafood.
Yeah,
I want to go out to eat. That's good for me on vacation.
Did you get some good seafood?
Oh yeah, and then of course we took Maverick like go karts and mini golf and stuff like that. That sort of stuff is fun. But like for me to really just kind of rest and decompress is like me just sit in a room by myself. I can watch some Netflix or I would say read a good book, but that's.
But
not
you don't
my
want to
style.
lie on podcast.
Yeah, and so
that's fair.
Yeah, but and I read a lot now.
I know you do. I'm blown away by the fact that you can't. The novel I
couldn't do it. It felt so cheesy to me because of course I get it because they're having to set this picture and like describe everything that's going on and really set this stage, but like it just felt so cheesy.
Yeah.
And the book I was reading was supposed to be a good author, but could have fooled me.
We'll leave that author unnamed on our podcast just in case we have any fans out there.
Yeah, that's right.
If you really want to know, ask Matt.
Yeah, that's right. I'll tell you. But so it was a good trip though. Had a good time. So, this week, you continued your Philemon series.
Yeah, we talked about refreshing, which I was hoping your vacation would be refreshing for you.
It was. It was. And, even got my Tennessee Vols, got a name drop in the sermon. Check that out.
Yes, I had somebody just a few minutes ago message me and say, well, I wasn't there to jump and cheer whenever you referenced it, but I hope Matt did. And I was like, as much as Matt jumps and cheers during a church service, then
that's right.
Yes.
So that was good, and talked about the excitement of baptism, which I think is incredibly important, and I echo that is that we, and I don't know if it is more just because of our reserved nature as Southern Baptist or whatever it might be, but I think it's healthy to show some excitement for those things, and we've had several lately, to include the worship night, Saturday night, and things like that. So I think those are some things to be really excited about.
Yes.
And show some of that excitement rather than worrying about, because I know there's a balance. We've talked about this on a former podcast. I feel like it's been a while, but, this idea of how you kind of balance this, reverent attitude versus, being excited. And so I think there's definitely a place for both. So that's all I had to say. That was a great way to kind of get into the sermon and continue this idea of refreshing and looking at the importance of relationships. I think cheering and celebrating for a baptism is, I think, an example of a refreshing relationship that you kind of talked about. And so as we're talking through this and, talking about, having these refreshing friends that you can go to, you gave a couple of examples, and these individuals that are there that just kind of provide this refreshing, opportunity to build that relationship and talk through things and that sort of thing. Question is like, what if maybe I'm a person who I feel as though, maybe I don't have any kind of refreshing friendships because I feel like I'm maybe always negative, or I feel like I'm maybe tearing people down, or I feel like maybe I'm, have, complaints or whatever it might be, and I find myself going through some of these things where people wouldn't really consider me a refreshing friend. Sure. What are some things that I can maybe do, or how do I become this refreshing friend to someone?
Right, and it may not be that you're. It's just that you're a complainer or whatever. It may
Sure.
just be that it's like you feel socially awkward and
Yeah.
like that you don't feel as comfortable in settings like that. And my encouragement is I'm a socially awkward human being, and I have found these relationships in my life, and so I believe that everybody can.
Yeah.
But I think the way to do that, I think part of it is like people are just going to naturally have shared interest, and the way that you figure out whether or not you have shared interests, and this is one of the three ways I think you can kind of become one of these friends, is by being intentional. And what I mean by that is like intentionally seeking out people to befriend and to spend time with. And if you're an introvert, that means that you're going to have to go outside of what's comfortable for you at first, at least. Because what you'll figure out is like as an introvert, one-on-one relationships are going to be incredibly encouraging and energizing to you.
Yes.
Whereas large groups tend to be intimidating and overwhelming in some cases. But if you're an extrovert, you have a different challenge because you want to spend time with a bunch of people, and it's a lot of kind of surface level acquaintance type relationships. And you're going to have to be intentional about digging in with individual people, which may not be as comfortable for you.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's a balance to be struck between the two. But I think a huge part of it is just being intentional, seeking those things out, not being fine with, well, we talk to each other occasionally, and it's just kind of like this really easy, like, kind of acquaintance type of relationship where we know each other a little bit, but we don't have to be real with each other in a way that's uncomfortable in any situation, that sort of thing. So I think being intentional is part of it. I think if you're going to be this type of friend, you've got to be more focused on giving rather than taking out of a relationship. You've got to be willing to give your time. You've got to be willing to give your ability to listen, to like your energy, your emotional effort, those sorts of things. Like, so there's going to be a part of you where it's just going to have to be, at least at first, give.
Yeah.
And there'll be I think there's a time in all of these relationships where that flips, where it's an interplay between giving and taking. That's the word that N.T. Wright used a couple times in his commentaries. There was an interchange between these sorts of friends where at times one gives and the other takes, and then that flips, and there are going to be times where there's the other that was giving is now taking, and vice versa. And then the last one, and this goes back to being grounded in God's grace and understanding that, and we're going to talk a lot about this next week, but being grounded in grace, and what that means is seeing people as God sees them.
Yeah.
And so understanding that the person that you're interacting with is a sinner, just like you are, struggles with selfishness, struggles with sinful desires, those sorts of things. And so we shouldn't expect them. I mentioned this in the sermon. We shouldn't expect them to be Jesus for us.
Yeah.
So these relationships are not intended to be something that gives us something that only God can give us. They're intended to be a blessing to us, so that we can go and in turn bless others or bless that one that has blessed us. And so it's not so much like it's kind of like icing on the cake. The cake is good. I like cake. Sometimes I don't like icing as much. That's not supposed to fit with the analogy because I like my refreshing relationships. But it's that extra that God gives us out of His grace that overflows into our everyday life.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's good. And I think it is a challenge because when you kind of think through that, and as I mentioned earlier, like for me, being much more of an introvert, and it's interesting because people change. Like I can look back in my life and I can see early college and before, really even post college. I was very much an extrovert. But for whatever reason, I have since changed, and I'm not. And so, like for me, it's much easier for me to just be in solitude and not, interact with anybody, and that's the easier thing for me to do. And I have to really work hard at being intentional to, work through those relationships and take that first step and, interact and some things like that, and it's just one of those things where it's not that I don't like people. It's just, for me, it takes a lot of effort to take those initial steps, like you kind of mentioned, and to give and that sort of thing. And so I just have to be more intentional in that.
Well, and I'll add that it may not be just the initial step either. Like, so you may have to be the initiator in the relationship at pretty much at all times. Where like, if you want to be intentional about spending time with somebody, you're the one that sends a text message to say, "Hey, we need to get together this week.
Yeah.
We need to talk on the phone. Something. We need to get together." And so, if you're the one that has to do that, just understand that that's your role. Like that's your role at this point in the relationship, is to be the initiator of those times of refreshing, of those times of just spending time together and being together. And that may not be the role that you're most comfortable in, but again, that's the intentionality of it. Is I'm going to go out of my way to make sure this thing happens because I know it's good for me and it's good for this other person as well.
That's right. Yeah, and and I think it's a growing process for all of us. As we kind of walk through that, and and like I said, I'm the world's worst. Like even like people I would consider close friends. It's not in my practice to be like, oh, I need to text them and reach out and see how they're doing, just because I'm world's worst of kind of thinking of like, well, our relationship's good. If there's any issues,
they'll tell me.
Then we need to talk through
They'll
it.
Tell me.
Because I'm perfectly fine talking through issues when they arise, but like I don't feel the need of like just checking in to make sure everything's good, and so I have to do that. And so like even a friend of mine, that's interviewing for a senior pastor position in Illinois, consider him a good friend, good close friend, and I ended up having a phone call conversation with him last night and to talk through some things and just catch up, and it was great. I mean, it was very much a refreshing time.
Yeah.
But other than that, he and I maybe text once or twice here and there, and I'm never the one to initiate it because I'm just terrible at that, and so I have to remind myself to be more intentional in that, and and so I've got some close friends that I would consider very close, but I have to really work at saying, oh, I should just text, here randomly, because those relationships are always refreshing once you get to that point and you can actually have that and start the conversation. It is. I feel like this is like therapy for me. This is
good. I'm glad that we're getting all this out, Matt, because like it's good to talk about these things, be transparent, honest, vulnerable.
Yeah. Welcome to my therapy session.
I'll have other questions later.
So continuing, looking at like refreshing relationships and this idea of having these conversations. Sure. You mentioned in the sermon that sometimes these refreshing relationships involve some difficult conversations, and it's not just a refreshing relationship isn't just defined by someone constantly, I guess fluffing me up or making me feel good, or there's some conversations that take place, so the real conversations to help us grow, and that sort of thing, So the question is how can difficult conversations be refreshing?
Yeah, I think in the same way that a really hard workout can be. And what I mean by that is during the really hard workout, you don't think to yourself, this feels great. I'm so glad that we're doing this right now. Yeah. It's mostly like, why did I do this to myself? This hurts so much. This is so painful. But you get to the end of it and you're like, your body is like, man, I'm glad that I did that. It may hurt, it may be sore, it may be difficult for a little while, but ultimately your body it feels better, it's healthier because of the fact that you took the time to put that in, to do that. So in the same way, like a difficult conversation can be that way. In that moment, it can be difficult to hear criticism. It can be difficult to hear places where you may be failing or places where you got to grow. Because we like to think to ourselves, we're completed. Like I'm good. Like the way I am is fine. And the truth of the matter is that's never going to be who we actually are this side of heaven. Like we're never going to be completed. We're always in process. Even the most mature of believers is in process still. You look at Paul in Philippians 3, where he's talking about how He is striving toward, the goal ahead of him, that ultimately that resurrection in Jesus Christ. He said, "I'm not done yet. I've still got stuff to do. I've still got to mature more." And that's true of us. And so, like, when we have those difficult conversations, and difficult conversations can range from, "Hey, friend, I see that you are struggling with this sin. I hear you tell me about this. This is what you need to do about this. This is not good. You don't need to let this be a part of your life." Two, "Hey, friend, I know that you're struggling with, I don't know, depression or anxiety or whatever. Like, I'm here to be here with you. I'm not going to fix your problem. I'm not your therapist. I am here to be with you through this." And it can be all kinds of things that those difficult conversations look like, but in the end, those difficult conversations ultimately lead to healing, to purging of really negative things a lot of times. Because, I mean, you think about a good workout.
Yeah.
Basically, you're purging your body of all of these terrible things that have built up over time, and you're releasing some things in your brain chemistry that are really healthy at the same time. And the same thing happens when we have these difficult conversations. If you're being honest with one another, you're purging yourself of things that are really toxic to your emotional life, your spiritual life, and you're able to then allow those, since those things have been purged out, you're allowing things that are like Philippians 4 that talk about, like, we can meditate now on things that are peaceful, or things that are that we can rejoice in, that are worthy of praise, that are excellent, all these sorts of things, because we've purged out all that negative stuff.
Yeah. And as you're kind of talking, using the working out illustration, I think in our culture, there was a time in my life whenever I pursued physical fitness, and had a personal trainer, and paid a personal trainer to work out with me, and did that for a period of time, and then did it again, not because I didn't know how to do the exercises or the workout routines and things like that. Everything he was having me do was stuff that I had done, in high school and stuff like that. And so maybe, but having that essentially a piece of accountability to push me and to challenge me and to increase my reps and do some things like that, that's the same kind of thing. And we're willing to pay someone to do that. Yeah. But when we start talking about spiritual health and spiritual, refreshing, we're much more hesitant to ask anyone and, to come alongside of us and be that kind of refreshing person to help push us and encourage us and walk through some of that difficulty.
Well, and that's why those relationships have to exist within the church, and not like, because the mindset sometimes can be, well, we have staff that can do that for us.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Matt, me, Brian, Logan, Stacy, Tim, Greg, Stephen, we don't have enough time in our day and in our life to be able to be that kind of friend for every single person in the church. And so what we want to do is we want to equip you to be able to do that. We want to equip our individual members. If you don't feel comfortable having those conversations or being in those sorts of relationships, we want to help you do that so that we can meet the needs of every person that attends Ridgecrest and that is a part of our church family. They have family members that are genuinely concerned about their well-being and want to be that accountability partner, want to be that personal trainer for them, for lack of a better term. Because I think that's a great way to just think about it. It is, anytime I've gone on a diet or anytime I've really tried to push myself physically, if I lack that personal accountability, if I lack that person that I can look at and say, they're waiting for me, or they're expecting me to be able to do this or that, then it's just easy to say, I'm not worried about that.
Yeah. You talked about life group and participating in relational discipleship being a great opportunity to find these relationships and to really develop, because in a small group of people, you're able to talk through things that you wouldn't talk through in a large group. I couldn't help but maybe think of, as you as a teacher, you lecture to your students, but I imagine there were probably times you had them break off into smaller groups to maybe discuss material or really debrief some things or share their opinion on things or whatever it might be. And they were able to kind of talk through some of the stuff that they just don't have the opportunity to do in a large group setting.
And they wouldn't do in a large group setting,
right?
Because they don't feel comfortable in that.
That's right. And so I think our life groups can kind of be viewed in a very similar way, where you have this small group of friends that you can do life with, you can share these concerns and struggles with, and walk through. You have these kind of refreshing relationships. And so I do agree that life groups provide a great opportunity to meet meet these friendships and develop, and turn into these refreshing relationships. So the question is, if that is such a great place to find these relationships, what can I do if maybe, my schedule, whether it be with sports or work or whatever, you can name a whole list of things that our schedules get filled with. What can I do if my schedule is so full that I can't really find a place to fit life group into?
Okay. Without intending to make anybody feel guilty, I think the first thing you need to do is check your schedule. Because if your schedule is so jam packed that you can't find an hour to an hour and a half of your week to go and hang out with friends and be with people that care about you, then we probably need to check the schedule and just say, okay, what all am I doing? Now it may be that you look at your schedule and you're like, no, I'm legitimately this busy. If you are, I think one of the things I would encourage you to do is talk to us about how we can help you find time. One of the things that we've tried to do and we're working on doing is creating more and more what we would call alternate times for life groups to meet, because life group is not something that just has to happen on Sunday. In fact, I think it's healthiest when it doesn't just happen on Sunday morning. It is something, I've used the terminology before. I think it's the terminology of Acts chapter 2 and really the terminology for the church. It is a day-by-day thing. It is something that we together, day by day, break bread in each other's homes and attend temple worship, which is the way Acts 2 talks about it, a corporate worship together. Not that our sanctuary is a temple, but like we gather together as the body of Christ and corporately worship. And so there is a sense in which, like, I think the expectation level for our life group should be a day-by-day expectation level. We together live life day by day. That may not mean that we meet every single day, but that we can reach out every single day to these people, and these people will be our people that will take care of us and provide for us. Yeah. So part of that is talking to us and making sure you understand what all your options are as far as life groups go. It may be that you can be a part of creating a brand new life group that meets at a time that fits into your schedule. Yeah. Because my guess is if you have a schedule that looks like that, there are probably other people in the church that have a schedule that looks like that. Yeah. One other alternative is to make, this is where Julie and I have gone to a certain degree. Now we want a group of church members that we have a life group with, which we are doing on Sunday nights right now. But we also think in terms of small groups outside of just like this is our church family. We look for other believers in places where we spend time a lot, and that's turned into baseball families for us, that we have created a connection that's deeper than baseball, and the expectation level is that we can talk about spiritual things, and we can encourage one another, and we can pray with one another, and so that becomes a group that we have kind of created organically. And P.S. for us, it's led to some of those families ending up visiting here and being a part of some of the things that we're doing here. And I think that would be my encouragement for those folks that are so busy that they have some people that they can look to and say, this is a group that but my encouragement is, we here understand that burden, and we want to try to create places for you and people for you that you can be with. And so that's part of the reason that we've pushed pretty hard to get groups to meet at alternate times and places, and just to help those families out that are really struggling with the schedule. Yeah. Because most of the things they're struggling with are good things.
That's right.
I think most of our families have good things on their schedule that probably are mostly beneficial, not all of them. Yeah. There are some things that we probably should work on saying no to, and but there are other things where it's like this is a genuinely good thing. It's good for our kids. It's good for our family. It's good for the community. But it also takes a chunk of our time. And so I see it as our duty as a staff to minister to those folks, and not to just try to. There's a part of which I want us to change culture and change cultural expectations, but I also want us to minister within the culture in which we exist.
Yeah, Yeah, and we're going to come back to a question here in a little bit that I think will tie back into this. Specifically, you mentioned this idea of looking out into the community and figuring out, how to have life group there, and specifically, like, you mentioned your baseball relationships, and figuring out what that looks like and how to start incorporating that and getting out of the mindset of, well, my life group has to be at church or whatever, because part of the schedule could be, well, I get off work at 5 o'clock and I can't get to, by the time I get to the church at, 6 o'clock and for a group, and then get home, it's late and that sort of thing. Well, what if we start kind of thinking through, some alternatives to that? And like I said, I want to circle back to that here in a minute. But before I do, what? Or no, let's go ahead and jump into there, and then we'll.
Sure.
So the question I have is, what role does, kind of my working / neighborly kind of relationships have on my life? What role do those kind of play as we're talking about having these refreshing relationships within our life group? But then we also have these people that we work with and our neighbors with. So what kind of role do those relationships play?
They can be a part of the general idea of these biblical, Christianly refreshing relationships. And the reason I say that is because I'm in the sermon, I mentioned two people that are not a part of our church that are my people. Now,
Right.
I want to make clear that there are plenty of people within our church that are those types of people for me.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people within my home that are those types of people for me.
Yeah.
But I wanted to mention those two in particular because I wanted us to I wanted our people to understand. I wanted to remind myself of the fact that these relationships came out of one intentionality. I reached directly out to Josh Brady, and I was like, I want us to meet and talk. And I just want to get to know you because I want to share with you like my heart for the fact that our churches aren't competitors; they're companions in this kingdom work, and that's turned into a really wonderful relationship. And then the other one was one that just happened very organically. It was a person that I worked with for 6 years, and we just spent time together, hung out together, talked a lot. And ultimately, those sorts of relationships are the ones that I think are most natural for us, and those are the ones that I want us as a church to see. This is where I can reach people most naturally. It's not. We have this mindset of, and part of this is because this was the mindset for a long time. It was effective for a long time as far as getting people to come to church and that sort of thing. Going and knocking on some stranger's door and inviting them to church. There is a place for that.
Yeah.
But I think that the most natural place is to take the people that know you, that have seen your way of life, that have experienced. That means you have to live a particular way, but you're living that particular way in front of them, with them, and you invite them into it as you do it, and it's just this natural thing. It's not this really uncomfortable, hey, stranger person, I know Jesus, I want you to know Jesus too, and they have zero reason to listen to you other than you showed up at their door.
Yeah.
And our culture doesn't work that way anymore. We're not as inviting, we're not as neighborly as we used to be in that way, and you have to work hard on trying to build those sorts of relationships in order to be thought of as you're welcome here, and I trust you, and those sorts of things. And so now it can be easy to get in those sorts of relationships and never get to Jesus too.
Yeah.
Because it's more comfortable to talk about basketball or shoes or the weather or whatever. But in reality, you got to eventually get to, if it's supposed to be a really important relationship for you, a really meaningful relationship, you better get to the most meaningful thing.
Yeah.
And we can't leave that out. So I think that's kind of how that should work.
Yeah. I think, of course, to kind of go back to that last question, is this idea of, one thing that's kind of come to my mind lately is we've got, you think about people working a 40-hour work week for the most part. Everyone's a little bit different. You got your neighbors that you're around every single day, and you have your church
Coworkers.
Coworkers. So you got this. You have your church family that right now, for the most part, people see 2-3 hours a week. And so which we give a lot of attention to, and to those times, which is fine. I get that, but if we have these relationships with our neighbors, our coworkers that we're seeing every single day, why are we not being more intentional at creating this life group environment in those places? If it's hard to leave work at 5 o'clock, get dinner, come to life group, get home, go to bed, what if we say, hey, our office closes at 5. I'm going to facilitate a small group, and we're just going to be here together, hang out an extra 30 minutes to an hour after work. And then that way, we'll head straight home afterwards, Something like that. Your baseball team, hey, let's, after the game, we're going to go down here to Dairy Queen and hang out, and, we'll have a small group together, for any of the families that want to stay and hang out. And so, to get out of this mindset of, again, kind of like you mentioned, life group does not have to happen at a specific place, specific time, or anything like that, but it gives us that opportunity to build up and, like you said, not just have these conversations, because it's easy to go to the baseball game, watch the game, talk through sports, that sort of thing, and say, all right, great, see you guys Tuesday night at practice, without ever getting to the gospel.
That's right.
But if we're intentional and, again, start trying to be, more creative in saying, hey, I'm going to invite all my neighbors over. Some of them might be involved in a different church. They may not want to come to my life group. That's fine too. Some of them may be involved in another church and they want to be a part of our life group. That's great too. And figuring out a way to start being more intentional at, again, making the most of these relationships we have every single day of the week, rather than I've got my church people that I do all my stuff on Sunday. So to kind of wrap it up, we've talked a lot about the good things of life group, the healthy aspects, and me finding these relationships. What if someone's listening and they might be involved in a life group, maybe whatever time or place, whatever they're meeting, but they're involved in this life group, but for whatever reason they feel like they're not really being refreshed. What would you encourage or them to do in that kind of situation?
Yeah, I always want to encourage people to be honest with yourselves and check yourself first. You start there, because we have to see ourselves honestly and truthfully and understand that part of the reason sometimes that relationships aren't what we want them to be is because we haven't done something. There's something missing from our end. Now, if we check ourselves and we find out, okay, I'm doing all these things. I've got questions that I'm going to ask in just a second that have to do with checking ourselves, and we're doing these things. And it may be right for us to reevaluate and say, you know what, maybe my participation in this life group is not what's best for the life group. Maybe I need to go and find a different life group that would fit what we want or what we need better and what we can give better. Right? So the first thing, checking yourself, there are 3 questions that I would encourage everybody to ask. 1, are you engaged? And what I mean by engaged is, when you're there, are you really there, or are you just counting down the minutes till you're done with being there? Are you checking in with people on a regular basis? Are you involved in the ministries of that life group? Are you serving with that life group? Those are like different kinds of ways of engagement. The second question is, are you participating regularly? Irregular participation is going to lead to a feeling of disconnectedness. I mean, it's just going to. That's the same true in corporate worship. If you're there once a month, it's going to feel like it's an uncomfortable group. It's going to be, you're not going to, people will share stuff and you'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about. And part of the reason you don't know what you're talking about is because you missed 3 weeks. And that's, I'm not saying that as a criticism. I'm saying that if that's the reality, then that may be the reason why you don't feel very refreshed by this situation. And the last thing is, are you seeking to be that person, that refreshing person? Are you giving more than taking? Do you see life group as a place where you're supposed to get something, or a place where you're supposed to give something?
Right.
And I think that is a mindset that probably a lot of us need to that question in particular. Am I seeking to give something to this group as opposed to get something from this group? That's a really important question for us to really ask ourselves, because if we're all giving to that group, then it's probably going to be a pretty great place to be. Right. But if we're all coming to get something, then if we don't get that thing, we're going to be really frustrated by the fact that we didn't get it this week. And so The same's true of corporate worship. You know, if I show up and I'm expecting to get something from corporate worship, then, and if I don't get that thing, or if it's not as good as I thought it was going to be, then I'm going to be really frustrated by corporate worship this week.
Yeah.
I've never walked out of a corporate worship service, with maybe one or two exceptions, where I was like, this was a miserable experience.
Yeah.
There were two exceptions. That one, I showed up at a church in North Carolina. It was called New Hope Baptist Church. Julie and I left that church and called it No Hope Baptist Church because we showed up, we walked in, not a single person spoke to us. There was a really weird sermon about Noah and Jonah and Moses, and it really didn't make any sense. It was told by two different people. The worship was so sad. We had people tell us that we were sitting in the wrong place. It was just one of the most uncomfortable places I've ever gone. You could tell that they were just like, we're just here to be here.
Yeah.
And I walked out of that situation, and I was like, this was terrible. That's probably the only time I've ever walked away from a church and was like, this is the worst thing I've ever done. Like, why did I waste my hour and a half to come here today?
Yeah.
But we also go with the mindset of we're here to give worship. We're not here to get something. We're not here to get a good sermon. We're not here. I mean, I would love for the sermon to be good. I would love for it to be encouraging, but I can read the Bible as whoever it is preaching. I can pick up my Bible and read and think about what he's saying and understand it and try to grow deeper in my own personal knowledge of the Lord and those sorts of things. I can sing as we worship and try to enhance the worship by giving, right? Some of us think to ourselves, we better not sing to enhance the worship. But that's not true. You should sing. Everybody should sing. But anyways, are you trying to give something to what you're doing, or are you trying to get something from it? I think if the primary goal is to get, then that may be part of the reason that you're frustrated by your life group situation. And then if you're doing all those things, if you are engaged, if you are participating regularly, if you go with the mindset of giving rather than getting, and it's still not a good situation, then it's probably time to find a new group. And that's not to say the group is bad. It's just not for you.
Yeah.
And it's not for your family.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Because not every group is going to fit everybody all the time. It's just not going to work that way. Personalities sometimes don't mesh. Personalities of life groups, because each life group has their own personality, just like every church has its own personality.
Yeah.
And so it just may not mesh, and that's okay.
Yeah.
There are hopefully alternatives places you can land, or you can create a brand new life group. And Matt would love to help you do that.
Yeah.
Because chances are there may be others that need a life group home that aren't quite where they need to be yet.
Yeah. And we've got a new life group that's starting up this Wednesday night, starting at 6:00, specifically for parents of teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got teenagers, or you've got maybe preteens and they're getting ready to go into that area, we're doing it on Wednesday nights at 6:00 because that's when students are here anyway, and so that gives parents an opportunity to have that fellowship and have some of these refreshing relationships with people in the same kind of life stage that they find themselves right now. And so that'll be in room 110, starting again this Wednesday night, which is June 9th.
That's correct.
And so love for you to be a part of that. It's going to be facilitated by Steve and Anna Given.
Mm-hmm.
And so that'll be going on again Wednesday nights, room 110, which is right across from the chapel where the students meet. So we'd love to have you at that group. But if that's not your demographic and you want to find either a multi-generational group or a specific life stage or anything like that, reach out to us. We'll be happy to help you find and get connected to a group, and so that way you can begin to build and develop in these refreshing relationships, and we care a lot about. And so as always, reach out to us. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Continue this conversation or go down a different route as far as maybe something you heard in the sermon. Reach out to either one of us or any of our staff members. We'll be happy to continue this conversation with you. But as always, we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time.